So, should I come over this side?
Yeah, I think that's it. Well done.
So it goes in a bit deeper. Right down in there. Good man. Good man. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were there. Well done.
One Timmy White.
Very brave. Very
That's
brave.
ticklish, lads.
Gee, that's ticklish. I'm going to be worse.
You don't mind which pass I use. It's down to one. Yeah, so it goes in kind of far. Just ignore me kind of if you can. I'll tell you when I'm there, okay? I'll tell you when I'm there. I'll tell you when I'm there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of that.
Soldier, boy. What a soldier.
Yeah. I'll tell you when I'm there. I'll be very gentle, okay? Good man. Well done. Sorry now. Okay, nearly there. Be brave, be brave, be brave, be brave. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good man.
You fell on a roller coaster.
Yes.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Two Norries podcast. As always, I'm joined by my good friend Timmy Long.
Hi, everyone.
And this week we have a lovely guest to bring you. He is the GP in Knocknaheeny, and he's also the doctor above in Cork Prison. Nick Flynn, how are you?
I'm great, thanks, lads.
Dr. Nick Flynn, should I say?
No, Nick Flynn is fine.
Doctor didn't come easy. We give you your credit. But thanks for coming out to meet us tonight.
No, my pleasure. Thanks,
And
lads.
can you let everybody know what you did to the three of us before we started?
So before we started, we just did a quick rapid COVID-19 antigen test, so to make sure that we could all sit down and have a chat without the masks and decrease the risk. So
Yeah, and we all passed with flying colours.
every passed. Some were braver than others.
I've actually heard about the test. You know, a lot of people say that they have these things like a cotton bud, and it goes back, and you can't visualize it until you actually have it done yourself.
Yeah, well, I've done a couple of hundreds, not a couple of thousands of them at this stage. So the thing is to go slow and go gentle, like, you know. It's not the worst thing, right?
For the people that don't know you, many will, many won't. Who are you and where are you from?
I suppose, as you said, my name is Dr. Nick Flynn. I'm a GP in Knocknaheeny and in Cork City, and my practice is my corkgp.ie. The mothership, or the main part of the practice, is up in Hollyhill. We've moved recently to St. Mary's Health Campus, which is the old orthopaedic hospital. Big, shiny, kind of Sex in the City building there, with a lot of activity. So that's great for the practice and great for the north side. But we also have centres in Grenagh, North Main Street, Union Quay, and Douglas. So we're kind of we have a fingerprint around the city, really.
Yeah. And how did you get into becoming a GP? What was? Have you got doctors in your family?
No, well, the story there is my dad was a butcher, and as soon as a cousin...
Same thing, really.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as a cousin of his heard I was going to become a doctor, I said, he can't be a surgeon anyway. Nobody will trust him, his father was a butcher. So, but no, I think like the story about becoming a doctor really was, I kind of always, in my head, decided I wanted to do medicine, and that wasn't, I don't think, through any like family connection or any great knowledge of what being a doctor was going to be. I think, looking back on it, it was probably as a kid, I said it once, and probably somebody said, "Oh, geez, that sounds great," and so then I got positive feedback, and so then I never really changed from saying that, because everybody always seemed to think it was a good idea, so I went with it. So I wouldn't say that it was in my DNA or ingrained to do it, but then I was lucky enough to, I suppose, to get the points in college and to study it.
Where did you study? UCC?
UCC, yeah. So some months being there more often than others, but yeah. So no, UCC, I mean, and great memories of my time in UCC, and great friends still from UCC. But when you qualify as a doctor with your degree in medicine, you're not really qualified for much, even though you've been studying for 6 years. You've got kind of a basic degree, and you need to do an intern year, which is a kind of a pre-registration year. And then even after that, if you wanted to, like, I suppose, work as a doctor, you have to do specialist training. So I knew fairly quickly the hospitals weren't for me, and thankfully, as soon as I got a taste for general practice, I loved it.
So do you know, from the day you walk into UCC in your first day, and you, like, how long does it actually take you to get on the ground as a GP in a location somewhere?
So the quickest you could do it now is 9 years. So it's 5 years. The undergraduate medical course is now 5 years, but your postgraduate GP training is now 4 years. So it's 9 years. Actually, one of the interesting things about that is, although it's 9 years, you know, but when you're coming out as a GP, you're still really at the very early in your learning curve. You know, lots of the stuff you learn in theory, you only really get good at it when you're doing it in practice. Whether that's you know dealing with addiction, or whether it's dealing with suspected cancers, or knowing how to get patients through the system safely.
Yeah.
But like you can't learn that from books, and there's only so much in training you can get. It's really when you get into the job that it becomes something that you get good at.
What's a big part of being a doctor? Do you have to have good social skills with people?
They say to me that's the 3 A's is what you need to be a GP. You need affability, so that's basically you need to be reasonably sound enough anyway. You need to have availability, so people need to be able to get to you, right? And the third A that you need is a little knowledge. So so that's
just a small bit.
Yeah, so that's they're the 3 A's. But I think in the end of the day, you probably need experience as well. And I've been very lucky. Like in my training career and in my work career, I've worked with some very experienced, very sound doctors. Like I trained with Dr. John Murphy in Carrigaline, could be kind of a mentor of mine, and would have really shaped the GP I was going to become. And then very lucky, like George O'Mahony, my partner up in Hollyhill, is really a steady influence and a very experienced doctor. So it's been
George
great.
would have been my family doctor for a long time.
Me too.
I remember when George started off, it was on Harvey Road in a small room.
It was like a little house, Timmy, wasn't it?
It was literally, and I'm not kidding with you, it was probably that size, the whole little room he had.
And the waiting room was the size of the table area here. It was
and
tiny,
it used to be packed. I mean, packed. And just to see how far they've came since then, they had the place in Hollyhill, which I thought that was a great building, and now down in the orthopedic, and to see George growing, like
growing old.
Yeah, well, that too. But he was a massive part of our family in general. Like with my mother and her own issues, with mental health and stuff. He would have been always.
Yeah, I think if clearly we can't. But if you could ask Chrissy about where George started, she'd probably go back a little bit before that. Yeah. There was actually a caravan on the site where the corporation housing office is, and where that new surgery was. That on that site apparently there was a caravan, and Dr. Martin Maloney used to have a surgery there that George used to locum in. So before they went to the end of Terrace House that you guys remember, there was a temporary surgery in a caravan. So it really is quite a journey.
I guarantee you somebody has a photograph of that. If they do, send it on.
If anybody has a picture of the caravan, we'd love it, because we've got a couple of the house, but we've none of the caravan, and we think that the practice has gone from that kind of infrastructure to we've got 36 consulting rooms across the city now, and capacity for 1,500 appointments a day, and it's some journey for. But if anybody has the caravan, that would be great.
Yeah, no, it'd be fantastic.
What's it like working in one of the city's worst areas for drug addiction and benzos addiction? And mental health.
Well, I'd say that a couple of things about working in the north side of the city and within the north side, working in kind of Knocknaheeny, Hollyhill areas, is that certainly has its challenges. I'd also say then that 85 or 90% of the time, it's a pleasure, and the overwhelming, I suppose, feedback we get, or the overwhelming kind of, I suppose, positive stuff about it, is that people in general are very thankful for small efforts. So sometimes, you do something for somebody, and honestly, I mean, not to do it would be terrible, but they're so thankful for it. Yeah. But I suppose the challenge in that part of town is that maybe there's maybe not even 20%, maybe 5-10% of people that for whatever reason, like if it's mental health reasons, if it's addiction reasons, if it's just maybe, some people they just misbehave, right? Yeah. So and that 10%, they really cause a lot of I suppose disharmony in the practice, and I think that's more proportionately more than if you're in a different area. So just, I mean, to be clear, 85-90% of the time and 85-90% of the people, an absolute pleasure, and then unfortunately 5-10% just make it difficult. But they make it difficult in a way that it is quite a challenge. Yeah. And if you think back to when you brought up George, I think that's fairly helpful. if you think back to when George was starting out, he was on his own for a long time. He got to the stage where he had a practice in Ballincollig and he had a practice in Knocknaheeny, and because he couldn't get help, right, he couldn't get a doctor to work in Knocknaheeny, he had to close the Ballincollig practice.
Just because they didn't want to work up there?
Didn't want to work there, right?
Is it true fear?
Probably the stereotype as well.
The stereotype, I think it's human nature. If you're going to, like,
look for the cushy number in
certainly
Rochestown.
Certainly an easier number. You said that now, not me.
Look, we can be honest, like.
We can. But you know what? And we might talk about the prison later, but one of the things about working in the prison is that every year code is represented in the prison now. Some disproportionately so, but you know, people can go astray from all walks of life. But coming back to I suppose to Hollyhill and the challenges, George couldn't get a doctor to work there, you know. He was going to take an ad out in the medical press, and it wasn't going to say where it was for, it was going to say doctor wanted. Practice is a fine view of the city, because that was something positive he could say, you know. So I suppose I was the first addition to the practice, and in a way, I don't know, I mean, you guys are YouTube superstars, right? But if you've seen there's a YouTube video about forming a movement and about leadership. It's called The First Follower. So in lots of ways, it's not the first person to do something that's important. It's the first person to follow that person. So that gives other people the encouragement that they can go to. Yeah. So when I joined very quickly, another doctor joined, and that was nothing to do with me. It was just that other people could see, like,
you
actually
felt safety and numbers thing.
You know, this can't be that bad, right? And now we've got, like, across the practice, probably 15 doctors, you know, 6 or 7 nurses, you know, probably on our busy times 20 admin staff.
That's phenomenal, isn't it?
So it's a big organisation now. You know, with that comes a lot of responsibility. Responsibility to the patients, responsibility to the team. So COVID has brought a lot of kind of challenges in that, because you know, if you're a smaller unit, it's probably easier to control the flow, easier to control how patients are accessing the service. You know, who comes in, who doesn't, and you have a more personal relationship maybe with some of the patients. So we've found it a little bit of a challenge that we had to make sure that we created enough capacity on the phone and in face-to-face consultations that all the necessary care could still take place. But we had to filter out some of the pastoral care we do, some of the social care that we do, and try and do that over the phone. So, like, we would have had patients that were kind of, I suppose, fitting us in, right, between Mass and the super on a Thursday, because that's what they did, right? You know, especially when we were so close to the super, you could throw a stone over there, like. You know, or someone unsure fitness in between the Holly and the super.
I know, But do you think then that as that surgery grew, that you kind of lost, or you lose that personal touch with certain people?
That's a great question or comment, and it's an observation, and I'm sure it's true. But if you think of the way we think about that is that we want to provide a service that the people need. And medicine has changed, so the population is getting older, the population is getting sicker as they get older, and also medicine has become more complicated, so the treatments are more complicated, they require more monitoring. It takes more time to do the actual medicine than it used to before, and people need more of that medicine. So the old image of the doctor with the the elbow pads and the pipe and kind of sitting waiting for people to come, like, society needs that to change. It doesn't mean that the practice still can't be a caring place for people, and that's very important, and that's one of the things that the 80% of people who are grateful for what we do, or 85% that are grateful for what we do, you know, like, a lot of time, and I learned this from George, like, people growing up in the north side, they get a mindset of kind of, I can't do that, right? So I can't be good at school maybe, or, you know, I can't go to college, I can't get a job. This is my perception, right? But what we try to do in the practice is we try and facilitate, well, you can do it actually, or you want a letter, we can sort that out for you.
Would you having practices around the city in Carrigaline and Ballincollig and in Rochestown, right? That kind of comment, like, from somebody in the north side, I'm not able, I can't get a job, look, my nerves are bad. would you hear similar things in different areas?
Again, people are the same everywhere,
Yeah.
right? But what's different is what percentage of people
Yeah.
have that feeling, have that notion. But I think it's more than that, actually, genuinely, because I don't think it's just like a mental health, and I don't think it's just maybe physical health or personality, so it's keeping people out of the workplace. I think there is you're starting at a minus. Sometimes maybe you're going to a job interview or trying to get into college when you're from that part of town, which isn't fair, right? But that's the fact. It's kind of like, there's a very positive movement now to like empower women and to have more female representation in government, on corporate boards and everything. And what they say is that in sports, that young girls have to see it to imagine it and be able to do it. And in a way, I think of that about the North Side.
Yeah.
I think that kids have to be able to see it to be able to do it. So if they don't see like their families going to college and working and kind of getting on, well, then they can't imagine themselves doing it.
There's a saying, you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
And that's good.
That's kind of
It's like your own story. You're just by chance you became a doctor because your father was a butcher. It wasn't that your dad was a doctor as well. It was just something that you believed that you wanted to be.
But if you're from Knocknaheeny and Hollyhill and other parts of the north side and some parts of the south side, where you mightn't have no history of education in your family or history of employment, or there might be a long history of mental health and antidepressant and benzodiazepine use and all this, it's very hard then for that child to come out and say, I want to be a GP or I want to be an academic, because it's so deviant, it's so different to what's the norm in that child's life.
It's even about like, where are the third level colleges? So it's like CIT or MTU, it's over in Bishopstown. UCC is on College Road, whatever. So the fact that St Mary's has now kind of risen from the ashes of the orthopedic, and there's a UCC presence there, I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think if there could be more of that, it'd be better. Like that, kids when they go to the doctor, they see the UCC logo in their backyard. I mean, that has to be helped, right?
And it's a beautiful campus.
It
up
is.
in St Mary's.
It is, yeah, it is. Like, it's got huge potential there, There's Heather House is there. It's a community nursing home. It's got 48 beds for elderly patients and patients with, I suppose, long-term enduring mental health needs. But there's also, that's been doubled in size, so there'll be nearly 100 beds there, probably by this time next year. There's the St Francis unit, which is a step-down unit from the Mercy Hospital. Again, that's great to have that in the north side, right? And in the community, it couldn't be any closer to the community. Yeah. And the idea there is that when patients have kind of run their course in the big expensive hospital with all the fancy scanners and all the well-paid doctors who deserve to be well-paid, and nurses, but so that when you can take them out of that kind of high-cost environment. And what they need actually is some physiotherapy, some nursing care, some maybe antibiotics, whatever, some rehabilitation, that they can come up to St. Francis unit, and it costs like a fraction of the cost to have them there. So, like as GPs, we support that unit, and it's like it's fairly interesting work. And then you've got of course the urgent care centre for minor injuries.
That's a very handy facility to have.
That's brilliant.
It is great. And like if you could get, like, say, the out of hours there, South Dock or something, the campus has got huge potential. And I'm sure, like, in fairness to the HSE and the politicians and the corporation, there is a significant kind of feeling of goodwill and desire to take advantage of that. So I'd say we'll see developments there over the next 10, 15 years.
Can I bring you back to the addiction now, because you're on the Two Norries podcast? But a little anecdote. Traditionally, George wouldn't have give out benzodiazepines too easy at all. Some of the old people and legitimate people, as I would call them, they needed them. They were prescribed the roach trees or whatever, So then we wouldn't have went to George, you know what I mean? So we would have went down the road to a doctor who I won't name. And I can, like, when you were talking there about, 85% of the patients would have been legitimate, and maybe you have 10%, maybe they are legitimate but might cause hassle. I can remember, it made me think of in that surgery in Cathedral Road at the time, you would have regular people in there, men and women, sometimes elderly, and you would have a big gang of fellas like myself and girls, and wheeling and dealing in prescriptions, in the surgery, blatant. You know, I'd say, and I know as George and yourself have expanded above, you get clients now because of the nature of the work, and because heroin came into Cork, you have methadone prescribing and benzodiazepine prescribing, probably maybe more than what was there traditionally. They get a lot of complaints from the women and the men in the surgery that they mightn't understand addiction, because I know people there's a fear that comes with the way methadone is being prescribed, or you know, Valium is being prescribed to the young fellas.
Probably unwind it from that a little bit, that fear, right? Because we had that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we considered introducing methadone prescribing the practice for probably 2 years before we did, and we had that fear that we were going to kind of, in some way, we didn't understand that we were going to bring trouble on ourselves, right? But we didn't understand the nature of methadone maintenance treatment as a very successful way for people's lives to be stabilised. And Joe, when we took the leap and did the training and started prescribing methadone, what we were surprised is that we were looking after these boys and girls anyway.
Yeah.
They were coming to us anyway, but they were just going to a different doctor for the methadone, you know, and we didn't know it. So it was far better for us to have all of the care and to know about their heart attack and to know about, you know, their asthma or their other problems, and to be able to include that in, you know, helping them with their methadone maintenance. So it's not just, I think, patients that need and the wider public that need kind of education and, you know, and that on addiction. I think it's also like, as doctors, as I said to you at the start, when you qualify as a doctor, you're learning until the day you retire. Like, you know, it is always something new that you're going to find out. As regards, you know, drug-seeking behaviour, which I think is what you're getting to. Like, it's a very difficult part of the job, and difficult for lots of reasons, right? But one of the main reasons it's so difficult is that the geniuses who made these drugs, they made really good drugs, right?
Yeah.
So benzodiazepines, I would say, have to be among the most effective medication at relieving anxiety that were ever invented.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Yeah.
Better than heroin.
Yeah.
For that type of, you know,
Just
relieving that anxiety, that fear, relieving you of this low self-esteem, the confidence, just all gone.
Yeah. And so that's in then is their problem, because when somebody has that feeling and they learn from either borrowing a benzo or buying a benzo or wherever they get it, and they learn that, actually, you know, that tablet made me feel different to how I've ever felt for a long time. And then if, as the doctor, you're standing between them and what they perceive, because they've got their healthcare beliefs of legitimately accessing a medication that they think will help them, and it's pointless, or not pointless, but it's very difficult to get them to listen to the, you know, okay, a week of this might be helpful, you know, maybe every two or three times a month might be helpful. But if we go on with this for 6 or 8 weeks and you get addicted to this, you'll become tolerant of it. You'll begin to feel like you felt before. They won't work. You'll need more for the same effect. You won't be able to stop it. You'll get withdrawal symptoms. And we now know from long-term use that they cause like cardiovascular problems, like heart attacks.
I used to get bad fits. Yeah,
and if you stop them suddenly, you get withdrawal seizures. Like, you know, so they're incredibly dangerous medication as well as being very effective. And I have an anecdote that I tell patients who are kind of in that benzo-seeking mode, right? And what I say to them is, I say, look, because they're normally, right, somewhere aged between, you know, 18 and 40 or 50, whatever. So I'll say, look, have you got any kids, or have you got a younger sibling, or you got a niece or nephew? And hopefully they say yes, and say, imagine you met that young person, right? They're in school and you met them, and they were really, really anxious. They couldn't study, they couldn't go to school, they couldn't go out with their friends because they were so anxious, and they really weren't enjoying life. And then imagine you met them like a month later, and they were totally mellow, like happy out, and they were well able for stuff. And you said to them, well, you know, how have you sorted that out? And if they said back to you, now they're only 19, right? And they say back to you, well, do you know what? I'm drinking a bottle of Buckfast every night, and it's freaking bang on. I'm sorted. What would you say to them? And most people go, it kind of drops, okay, well, like alcohol to solve your problems, like we can see that's not bad. But I had one fella, and he said to me, I say, fair play to you, young fella.
Yeah.
So I really wasn't going to get anywhere with that with him. But you know,
You know the one thing about benzos though and other drugs is they are just a quick fix. You know, they don't solve the problems that are behind everything else.
Yeah.
You're just pushing it down the road, aren't you?
That's all.
But you know the challenge, like the difficulty we have, right, is that, and it's getting better, but it's still the difficulty we have is that when somebody comes into you though, and they're on that journey, you know, and they are strung out with anxiety, but even leave drugs out of it for a minute, like, you know, to say to them, I'll get you counselling in 6 months, which is what we used to have to say. Now that's improved now, right? So, like when you lads were coming through, and up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago, before the new system, this counselling in primary care service kind of arrived, which is very effective at getting quick appointments. But before that, we had no access to quick counselling, so we had no non-drug treatment. You know, so like it's almost counterintuitive when you're in the helping role to leave somebody walk out without anything. So when you're going back to how things were so bad, and clearly, like, you know, some practices, the line in the sand was like, you know, it was like what do they say in that film, the circle of trust is a dot, you know, like it's so far away. But so clearly there were some practices that disregarded safety, but some well-meaning doctors, like and myself included probably on occasion, have prescribed it out of having no other option to go.
Yes, that's the way I was just going to get to.
And then when you get there, you know, like 2 months passes quickly, you know, and we do other things as well.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the person is taking it for 2 months, and now you've got to try and get them to withdraw from it. And
Do you know, if somebody presents to you, you know their background, right? And you know this person has been sexually abused or neglected or had a very tough upbringing, and they come to you with addiction problems and stuff, and you think that maybe Valium or a short course as Annex in the acute time would be beneficial until something else more longer term. Have you the capacity, or is there facilities there for some intervention in terms of psychotherapy, trauma, to help that person work through the trauma, or is it a huge waiting list, and is your hands tied?
So there is this counselling and primary care service which is satisfactory, but it could do more. Now that's not a reflection on the people working in the service. It's just every service
available.
Every service is limited by resource. Exactly. So patients who are not currently attending mental health services, not currently attending psychiatric service, can attend the counselling and primary care service for 8 sessions. And you know, for some people, you know, that might be enough. But for a lot of people, you know, and I don't know if you've personally experienced it, but like some people, they need that crutch to go back to every now and again. So and it's one of the areas where people who can't afford and people who can afford are really disadvantaged. So if you can afford like €70 every 3 months or every 2 months to go back and kind of top up with the counselling, it's just it helps people to ground themselves, to remind themselves of what the good habits they have to do, the good thoughts they have to have in their head, the healthy thoughts and healthy habits. And sometimes people just need that reminder, right? You know, and it might be the same chat every 2 or 3 months, but it helps. And that service isn't there for you know, for patients who can't afford to pay for it, unfortunately. Now, when it comes to somebody coming in acutely distressed like that, like the acute system, it does struggle to manage that, right? Because what are GPs in general? Like, we're principally diagnosticians. We're a lot of our training goes into teaching us how to diagnose
and refer.
Diagnose and treat, and maybe refer when we've got to the limit of our treatment, you know. But we're certainly very few of us psychotherapists. Yeah. So without having access to that psychotherapy, well, then you are referring, you know. And how do you get access to psychotherapy? You have to refer through the mental health services. And for a lot of people, that's not the appropriate pathway, right? You know, they don't need to see a psychiatrist. They don't have like significant depression or, you know, or psychosis. So they could benefit from like psychotherapy without having to go through the gateway of the psychiatrist.
You know, in a perfect world, would you like a psychotherapist in your office space above, in your facility? Would you like a resident psychotherapist that could deal with somebody in a brief intervention type of a way?
I think that would be very helpful, right? Yeah. But it wouldn't necessarily need to be in my surgery, because all surgeries are different sizes. Now, we're probably big enough that we would have somebody fairly busy. Yeah. But if again, it comes down to resources. Like if the resources were there, and you know, and there was enough psychotherapists that patients could access in a timely manner, well, that'll work, but we're a long way off that.
I'll just bring it back there to you spoke about the primary care. I remember when I gave up the drugs 9 years ago. I don't know, was it yourself or George? I went up there. I was just after coming down off a massive cocaine and benzo binge as well, and alcohol. And I was in an awful lot of more trouble again. And I went up and I didn't know what to do. You know, and I went up and I just said, listen, I'm struggling. I don't know what to do with myself. I'm a few days off drugs, you know, but all I want to do is use, and I don't want to. I want to try to get my family back, and I want to try to, because I had prison facing me as well at the time, and I was put straight onto a counsellor down Herring House. And I had the 8 sessions, and from there they were able to get me into a treatment centre. You know, I was talking to a young person there yesterday on the phone, and they were just asking me, like, they're off drugs at the moment and they're struggling with their mental health. You know, my advice to anybody would be, like, if you're struggling with a mental health issue, my advice is try to use some form of meditation. I know in some cases they might need a medication because it might whatever pain they're in, emotional pain is severe. But have you ever said to a patient, take up mindfulness? We have these mindfulness classes here. You know, or is that kind of...
No, of course we do it all the time, right? Every single day, you know, we do it. But if you're to rewind there to when you came down to the doctor, but this was your road to Damascus moment, right? Yeah. And seems to have been the one. But yeah, the challenge for us there is, right, that when somebody comes into us like that in that situation, like benzos have a street value, right? So I don't know, D10 is worth €2, a D5 is worth 1, a D2 is worth 50 cents, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but they have a street value.
You're close there anyway.
And so we the challenge for us is, right, that are we making this situation worse by enabling you? Are we becoming another cog in the enabling wheel for you in that situation? Yeah. Because at some stage somebody has to say no, this has to stop.
I remember going in and actually saying, I don't want any meds. I took an antidepressant, all right, until I went into prison. I was prescribed that for a few months just to help me in the background, you know. Yeah. But I came off, and then when I went in,
that's a fantastic story to be at that point and to come back.
See, when it works well, when the person is ready as well, doesn't it?
That's what
that was the thing about it.
In you. And so you were kind of ready for the road. But for every one of those consultations we have, right, we have 100 where the only thing going on behind the eyes is
D10s.
Yeah, I'll get my prescription, and we don't know what happens then, right? So we can phase the prescription, which means they can only get a day at a time or whatever. But so we give the prescription, and then they take the diazepam and cocaine and heroin, and you know, so we're just adding to the cocktail. Or actually, is this the time that they really need it and want it? Yeah. So like, you know, it's
big call.
It's very well. It's very difficult.
It's impossible.
It's very difficult. But really, you know, what I tend to do is more often than not, look, say no. You know, that if this is for real, go away. Don't use for a day or two, and come back with an advocate. Come back with your mother. Come back with your wife or your father, whoever it's going to be. Right. Come back. And then we'll have a chat. We'll have a three-way chat, and that other person in the room will tell me if you are changing, if you have changed, or they have an opportunity to tell me. Because if you don't have that collateral history, you know, you really are shooting in the dark.
Yeah, because drug addicts are very, very good at telling you lies.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
Yeah, between the age of 17
and also I've seen family members come in and lie as well.
A collective effort. But, you know, between the ages of 17 and 27, I spent most of my time travelling Cork City and County on the bus with money, collecting scripts off doctors and trying to plumb off doctors. No, most of the time, no. Yeah. you come across that, you know, look, if you're serious, we can work something out and come back. But you don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
You want to see him pull out the pen,
Yeah.
and it's not on. It's all on a white piece of paper. You know, it's not official, like say. And you go to different chemists all the time. The Holy Trinity was Xanax or diazepam, 2 Rohypnol in the night, and 4 DFs. You know, so you're 120 DFs, 90 D10s, and 60 Rohypnol. That's what you're always looking for, you know. You might trade the Rohypnol for a Halcyon.
You're giving all the secrets away now, James.
I know, I'm just trying to be trying to be transparent.
But I tell you how much it's changed. Rohypnol is no longer available, and dihydrocodeine or DFs are no longer
But
available.
I'm showing my age there, so
Yeah, you are.
but
but those scripts that you described there, because we calculated it, one of those scripts is worth about €340.
I know, that's what I'm saying. So like what happened there is, like, let's say if you throw enough darts, you're going to hit the bullseye. Do you know what I mean? So it takes a lot of time and effort to go around Cork City and County. But occasionally you get good doctors that once they see the €50, they start writing, right? And I don't want to name anybody.
A good doctor being an oxymoron.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing was the diazepam or the Xanax, the Rohypnol and the DFs, you know, because the DFs then, they were expensive. People used to buy them. People with chronic pain addiction, they'd buy the DFs like that off you, you know, and we used to trade them and stuff like that. But I tell you one funny story, right? The story was, this now when I was 17 or 18, before I had been to prison, so I was young. And the story was that, our spoof, our Billy story, as we used to say, go into the doctor, tell the doctor you're only after getting out of prison, you were on this, that and the other in the prison, I know you've no GP, and you're just looking to get on your feet, and that was it, you know. Most of the time now you get ran out the door, but sometimes it works. But I went into this doctor right in town, and gave the story. I'm only after getting out of prison, you know. I was on 2 Rohypnol in the night, 3 diazepam 10s a day, and 4 DF118. And he says, what prison were you in? I says, Cork Prison. He says, I am the GP for Cork Prison. With Con Murphy.
No better man.
Yeah, stop. I tell you now, I ran out the door. Stop.
Do you know the way the pharmaceutical companies in America, Nick? I know now we're going off track a little bit. How much power they have in pushing meds and doctors, basically, to get rid of them. Have they got that much power back here in this country?
Not as much. I think the States is a different healthcare system. A lot of it funded by insurance. The pharmaceutical companies, I mean, I don't know for sure, right? But the pharmaceutical companies can market prescription drugs directly.
And an ad on the telly. You can get, like, are you suffering with this, that and the other on the trope, 100 symptoms, and then start advertising opiates and stuff.
Yeah, so you have a lot of, you know, the Tylenols, the paracetamol, codeines, all that, the Tramadols, I think, would have been marketed heavily, and the oxynorms and the morphine drugs were marketed heavily directly to the patients or the consumer in the States, you know. So everything from being like not just on telly or radio, on bus shelters, in magazines, like it's everywhere. So it's a slightly different culture. I don't think they have that much influence. I'd be naive to say they don't have a lot, but they do product placement. So like they do, like, you know, they have kind of advertorials and glossy magazines and that stuff, but it's not the same. Like I tell you how different it is that Viagra you can buy over the counter, right?
Yeah. Not that I need it, like.
So I saw the advertisement for it on TV, and it was just brand new that it was available over the counter, and straight away it was foreign to me. Like, what are they doing advertising that? Like, because in my head, if they start doing that, well then you'll have a queue of patients kind of asking for that medication, and that's putting the cart before the horse, because the diagnosis comes first and then the treatment. But if you start marketing direct to the patients, well then the patients will want the treatment sometimes before the diagnosis is confirmed or clarified. You know, so.
Can I ask you something about, I suppose, a relatively recent phenomenon, and I don't know if you experienced it, but young men presenting with issues relating to steroid use. Have you come across that? And is it that prevalent?
A little bit. I want to be careful because I don't want to identify anybody, but we have had steroid-related complications in patients varying from the very kind of benign and almost ridiculous, you know, from injection into the thigh getting infected to, you know, we had steroid related cancers, you know, so so very dangerous. Like, so if anybody is watching the podcast,
that's why I bring it up.
And if they are using steroids for anabolic steroids for training, incredibly dangerous, you know. Mood changing, makes you aggressive, affects your sexual performance, you know.
Does it actually affect you having kids?
And comes with, it can do, and comes with long term, like genuine long term risk, increased risk of cancer. We've seen that in the practice.
Yeah, no, thanks for that.
Yeah.
That just before we move on to the prison, the juicy part, I just wanted to cover that, you know, because it's important, because there is a lot of men and women out there getting caught up with the Instagram, the body, and all this stuff, and they start using all that. So you're the doctor in the prison as well.
Yeah, our practice covers the prison. Yeah, so we'd be up there now for maybe 7 or 8 years in total. We'd a little hiatus in the middle, but we go out on TR for there for a year or two.
Open the scheme. It's possible now that a lot of the prisoners might be watching this.
Okay.
So choose your next words carefully. Well, what's it like being a doctor in a GP? Obviously, or being a doctor in the prison? Obviously, we know. Like, if you're in prison, your life hasn't been gone too well, do you know what I mean? And you're coming up against very hurt people. They might be angry on any given day. They might have a lot of mental health issues. Like, I'd say it can be a challenge. And
yeah, so I mean, it is a challenge, right? So I suppose a couple of things about the prison. The biggest difference between healthcare in the prison and healthcare in the community is, if in the community you decide, no, Nick Flynn is not the GP for me, you have a choice of 200 GPs in Cork. You just say, Nick, goodbye, and never see you again. If that happens in the prison, if the relationship breaks down, like, you know, I'm still the GP, right? So there's nowhere else to go, and that's a tricky one. So it's important that you try and preserve relationships with lads as much as you can, and in general that pretty much does happen. For people who haven't been in the prison, the process by which people, I suppose, come into prison is called committal. So you're committed to prison, and within 24 hours of committal, all prisoners have a statutory entitlement to review by a medical doctor. If it's a murder charge, that I think goes down to 12 hours, and it can be with a psychiatrist as well. So that committal interview is very important. That's where the risk. It's kind of like, you know, landing an airplane. So it's the flying the plane is fine. It's the landing it and the taking off that are the tricky bits. And so that the lads are landing in prison, and particularly the young guys whose lives are chaotic and who are in there because of crime related to drugs and have been using, like they can come in like having had like a lot of heavy and recent drug use, and all of a sudden it stops. And like you identified earlier, James, like that's a risky time. You said you had withdrawal seizures from benzodiazepines, like, so that can happen with opiates, with the benzos, with alcohol. And so it's important that the prisoners that arrive in have the opportunity to consult with a doctor, have an opportunity where it's appropriate to get a methadone substitution treatment, or get Librium if it's alcohol or benzodiazepine abuse, and have an opportunity where other kind of healthcare issues can be addressed that are urgent, because obviously the first day they haven't arrived in hospital, right? Sometimes you have to explain that to the lads, like they've been saving, you know, their ingrown toenail for 2 years.
You know, or their teeth. The dentist is a big one as well.
And they want to sort it the day they come in. But so you have that committal bit. But once that committal bit is over, and lads are in jail for, I'm saying lads because I've never worked in a female prison. Once that committal bit is over and lads are settled down, like, there are just about 0 benzodiazepines prescribed in the prison.
Yeah,
and that's why, like, cause I listened to those stories, right, of lads telling me, you know, I was in the prison, I was on D10 3 times a day and a halcine at night, but you go up there and you couldn't run the prison, right? if that was going to be the case, it would be impossible to run it. So there's no benzodiazepines just about prescribed unless somebody is acutely distressed, maybe from bereavement, you know, or on committal they need something to alleviate symptoms of withdrawal and de-risk the possibility of a seizure. So they would be situations where you might get it. But other than that, like, you know, being a doctor in the prison after that committal period,
Yeah.
same as a doctor everywhere else.
I think that story of I was on this and that in the prison might be a legacy of Spike Island, where that kind of prescribing actually did go ahead.
Did it? Yeah.
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't in Spike. But no, I just want to say that now.
Yeah.
But I know people that was in Spike, and
Yeah,
they
that's
were
interesting. I
they
didn't
were
know that. No.
prescribed. But one thing there, can I give you my experience of committal? Generally, I'm after being on heroin for a period of time and benzodiazepines, but because I wasn't on methadone on the outside, right, I wasn't given any methadone when I go in. I get Librium, but when you're withdrawn from heroin opiates, Librium doesn't do much for you. Inside in the cell then, where at the time, I'm talking about between 2006 and 2012, this was kind of it. Into a cell then, you've no toilet, you've no running water.
This is Cork prison.
It's Cork prison now, you know, and cold turkey. And normally looking back, I think it's actually inhumane to leave somebody in a cell like that. And I'm not saying, I'm not blaming anybody, no. These are just the systems. But is it still like that? You still have to be on methadone on the outside to get methadone on the inside?
Actually, Joy, to be fair, it was even worse than that. If you were on methadone in the community, methadone maintenance in the community, or if you're on methadone maintenance in another prison and you transferred to Cork, up until probably maybe 10 years ago, even on maintenance, it wasn't renewed, right? When we went there first, we were either just starting or had just started to prescribe in the community, so we didn't know, we weren't very experienced methadone prescribers, right? So, but after a couple of weeks, it became apparent like what was this, you know, because it would be like a diabetic coming in, you didn't give them their insulin. Or,
because there's sick people that need medication,
Yeah,
you know, and just because
absolutely.
they're...
Seen it happening in the prison. I see fellas be moved from one prison to another, and they're not getting their methadone, you know. In the second prison, you know, it's and they're being very sick.
Yeah,
and
it would be
kicking doors and they're banging. It's for them. It's it's completely out of routine.
It has changed, thankfully. And if you're on methadone maintenance, when in the community, when you come into the prison, your methadone will be prescribed. There's no issue. You just have to provide a urine confirming that, and the chemist dispensing it. And as long as those two boxes ticked, it's not a problem. For the lads who are not on methadone and who are using heroin, smoking or injecting, if there's a pattern of use, and if the urine is positive for opiates and they request it, you can get a methadone detox. And while you're on the methadone detox, if they want to go on to methadone maintenance, it's something that we can discuss and it's something we can facilitate for them. But going back to that kind of methadone bit, like George and myself have been through, as you can imagine, we've been through a lot of battles, right? I can imagine, and the practices have expanded. I think if you were to ask either of us what is the thing that we are most proud of in our careers to date, it will be that we were part of the change in Cork Prison that facilitated the prescribing of methadone.
Yeah, I think the period I'm talking about is PreE and maybe just at the start of E, because I remember going to George, you know, around the end of when I was starting to go in and out, you know, and
2008 was it?
I think the last time I was in 2012.
Okay.
So it's PreE really, but I'm glad to hear that it's better these days, you know, because
it's now standardised across the prison estate, right? So it's the same. You get the same service, and this is what healthcare has to do everywhere. You get the same service in Cork as you get in Castlereagh, as you get in Portlaoise, Limerick, Mountjoy, you know, Cloverhill. It's the same service. But just coming back to the to the benzo bit in the prison, right? Yeah. And where it gets difficult, because I think it's nice to have the opportunity to talk about, like, doctors we don't pretend we know it all, right? And we try and practice good medicine that benefits our patients, keeps our patients safe, and actually keeps ourselves safe as well, because we've got rules that we need to abide by to have the license to practice medicine. If we don't follow those rules, our license gets removed. So I've one lad in particular, but this has happened a lot of times, but one lad in particular, because the first time I heard the phrase 3 hots in a cot, right? I was his doctor up in the prison, and I knew zero benzos. I was also his doctor in the community before he went to the prison, and in fairness, he was on probably 15-20 milligrams of diazepam a day, divided doses, and probably a sleeping tablet before he went in. And then he went in, and clearly had nothing, and he was in for a good 18 months. Now, he was a bit of a chancer, right? He was, he's one of the lads, right? And he, like, now he wasn't menacing or anything, but he'd be a bit pushy. And so he did the time anyway, and he came out. He wasn't out like 2 seconds, he was up. I want my prescription. And I said, well, what do you mean you want a prescription? You haven't had this. No, it's my prescription, my medication. I want my medication. This is the kind of rhetoric that you get that you have to try to help lads move beyond. So I said to him, no, come on. I said, you've had the last year and a half, you've had no benzos. And you're asking me now to restart the problem for you by prescribing them again. We're not going there. And, he actually made a very coherent argument for prescribing them. He said, but what do you mean I had no benzos? Sure, I had no stress. I was up in the prison. I had 3 hots in the cot, and I had the exercise yard, and I had the lads. I came out now, and she's wrecking my head. And like, no offense to any of the partners, but this is what he was saying. And I've got the kids' communions are coming up, and Christmas is on the way. I have to find all this money, and I'm totally stressed. So he was kind of making the point to me that prison was easier than real life.
Well, can I give you a bit of insight into that? Because I can relate 100% with that man. When I was in the prison environment, back in my day anyway, Cork was a relatively clean prison, and the Dubs, if there's Dublin prisoners watching this, they would traditionally come to Cork to dry out, Sometimes they come down to go to the block and whatever, But Cork was a relatively clean prison. In Cork prison, I could be drug-free for a period of months and not even want drugs, because I had access to my family, because they weren't worried about me. I was going to the gym. I had my 3 hots in a cot. I played football in the night time. I went to school. I had a structure. I had safety, security, and all these things. I wasn't bound to drug dealers or doctors or debts or nothing. I didn't want the drugs there. It's not as soon as I get out the gate, all that fear I was talking about a while ago, the anxiety, the insecurity, the self-esteem, the guilt, the shame, everything just floods back, and it's like taxi straight to the doctor. Sorry lads, our cameras got cut, but I was talking there about that reference you made to that guy who didn't need the tablets in the inside, but on the outside. And then I was talking about when you get out, you've all those issues, reasons why you use drugs are there still waiting for you, and now you need that crutch, and it's the only coping skill you probably had learned to use on the outside.
Yeah. So I just to go back on what James just said there, I remember the last time I was in prison, I had the similar thing happened to me. I came out, I was in there, I was meditating 2 hours a day, I was in this school, things were going really well, I was after getting calm, my legs weren't hopping anymore. I came out of prison, I was introduced to a woman, my wife now, I had to get to know her. I had 2 kids, I had to get to know them. I had the stresses of life, the financial stuff. I had all the shame, the guilt of all the things that I'd done in my addiction. I had to go to the doctor. I was actually thinking of taking my own life, and I had to go to the doctor. We sat down, we had a great chat, and at the time the 2 of us came to the conclusion that it was probably best that I went on an antidepressant for a bit. And I was in recovery as well, because I would never take any form of anything that would affect me on a daily basis, would give me a high or anything. I took that for one day, and somebody talked me out of it. They talked me out of taking them, right? So that's one thing. I just want to go back to one more thing, right? The way people come into the prison and they're referred to you, they have to see, should there not be a psychiatrist or a psychologist do the exact same thing for every single prisoner?
I don't think for every single prisoner, right? I'll tell you honestly why I don't think for every single prisoner. I think because, like, healthcare, you have to want it, right? And so and I have to need it as well. So like, some of the prisoners don't need it, right? Genuinely, some lads come in there, whether it's fraud, whether it's a sexual offence, whether it's an assault, after some people are what I'd say incredibly unlucky. They have 4 or 5 pints, they have a fight outside, and somebody cracks their head in the curb. and they end up on a manslaughter charge, Now that person probably does need psychological help. More people don't, and they genuinely don't. And coming back to the young fellas, a lot of young fellas don't want it. And you have to want it, right? I mean, like, the resources in the prison are finite as well. And even if they weren't, psychology doesn't work unless you're willing to go the journey, right?
That's true.
And like we see lots, I suppose when I was talking at the start about general practice, and you've got your basic qualification, you're a GP, but the longer you practice, hopefully, the better you get and the more you learn. The more you learn about medicine, the more you learn about human condition as well. And I can see now, and like your guys, your generation are probably one part of what I see, right? So I saw, as a young doctor, very young doctor, I saw you guys coming through, and like your generation, not you personally, and in that generation I saw the chaos, and I saw the Friday evenings guys strung over the chairs asleep, in the waiting room, and I saw the damage. I saw some of your peer group with brain damage from overdoses. There was one poor lad who was a very nice man, right, and I was probably the most important person in his life for about 6 months, right, and he was brain damaged for an overdose. And I was doing a house call one day. He was shortly after he came out of the hospital. And I stopped the car to talk to him. He didn't know who I was. I couldn't believe it. Like, I mean, it was so sad. And he's like, probably now he's in his 40s, right? I have another patient, again, a very, very nice man, very soft man, but very much like prone to addiction, his personality. And again, he used to be up to me every week because we had him on a weekly prescription. And bloody hell, you'd see him probably 2 days in between as well because he wanted more, right? And then he went off to Tabor Lodge. Tabor Lodge is 4 weeks, and like, even though I was very fond of him, right? And he wasn't abusive or anything. I kind of had a little sense of relief because those 4 weeks, somebody was going to help him. It wasn't going to be me, and he was probably in the right place for that help. 2 days later, he turned up again. I said,
hack it.
Exactly. I said, what are you doing here? And he said, they were mean to me down there. Now, I used to work in Tabor Lodge, right? And you guys probably know that group treatment works as well. Yeah, so part of that is that, like,
it's confrontation.
Yeah, if the doctor tells you, I've said to patients, like, you're ruining your life. These drugs are becoming the reason for your life, and that's not right, and all the stuff you say to people, right? And then I've had people say back to me, sure, that's fine for you. I had one fella said to me, you probably have 4 bedrooms and 3 toilets in your house. I don't know what difference that made, right? But that was how he was expressing that. So you're probably fine, right? People think the doctor's always fine, by the way. And one of the challenges in being a doctor is that, like, literally the arse could fall out of your life as you walk into work, but you still have to do 6 or 7 hours where you're trying to solve other people's problems.
Yeah.
But so like, you get these group of people, and come back to the lad that came up from Tabor Lodge about doing it. He actually missed his chance because he died about a month later.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, like, that was probably his chance. I have another lad, again, haven't seen him for a couple of years, but again, I'd be really, really fond of him. And I learned loads from these guys. So he's a guy that got a compensation payment. Look, it wasn't 75 grand, but I'm just going to say 75 grand for anonymity. And through a year, he went through his 75 grand and another about 20 in debt, right? And he had a car. He was going to try and sell the car, couldn't sell the car, so he burnt the car out trying to get the insurance money. Couldn't get the insurance money. Now he had no car and 20 grand debt. I met him. Actually, prison saved his life, I'd say. I met him in the prison, and I didn't recognize him. And I knew him really well. He had lost so much weight. He was like, honestly, he was like skin stretched over a skeleton. His body mass was gone so low, and that committal to prison definitely stopped the cycle of drug abuse and chaos in his life, and he actually has done quite well.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's great to hear. Yeah. And when you're talking about overdoses there, like, I've lost a lot of friends. I lost a couple of very close friends and a lot of acquaintances and people I knew from the local area, through drug use and overdose and stuff like that. And it's actually very sad. It's so tragic. But one thing that used to scare the shit out of me, and the reason I didn't go on methadone for a long time, was because benzodiazepine was my primary drug of choice, and I used to consume a lot of benzodiazepines. And when some people ask, they wouldn't believe the amount that people could actually take, in terms of like 50, 60 Valium in a day type of thing, As I said it before, my dad used to slag me saying, you're the only man in Cork to wake up and take 10 sleeping tablets. But I used to be afraid of methadone because I know of a good few people that have overdosed on benzos and methadone. it's toxic together. What is it about methadone and benzos that tips people into overdose?
It's probably due to your respiratory depression, I would say, most likely. But it's a very common perception that patients have about methadone. They don't want it for whatever reason. They have their healthcare beliefs that they don't want it. But I find that counterintuitive, and I don't really understand it, because what's the alternative is that when they get the cravings, they're going to use.
I'll tell you why.
heroin.
Do you know what it is? All right, you have this side. My perception was because I was afraid of the overdose, because I know a few people that have overdosed. When you're taking methadone and benzos, the risk for overdose goes way higher than benzos on their own, and I consume a lot of benzos. But there's also the thing of when you're taking heroin, if you go cold turkey, 4 to 5 days of hell, you're fine. Do you know what I mean? You're fine. You're out of it. The withdrawal is gone.
So
When
the
you
physical
want,
withdrawal is gone, but your habit desire to
But it-
reuse is still there. Right?
the mindset is not around recovery. It's around sobriety, and there's a difference. In 4 to 5 days, I can get myself clean from heroin. The withdrawals will be gone, and I'll be grand. Right? That's the wrong mindset to have. But when you're on methadone, you're on that. There's no quick fix coming off that. Like you don't go cold turkey off methadone. The withdrawals are way longer and way worse. And when you're on methadone, it's just a very long process, and psychologically, it can be very isolating for people. And it can be very, it can affect people psychologically, because you're bound to the chemist and you're bound to the GP, and there's no like 4 or 5 days and you're out of it, you know. So I think that might explain it.
Yeah, I think if it was true to say that a heroin addict, right, or even the majority of heroin addicts, not all of them, were able to do that, I think that might be true to say, but that's not my experience of it.
No.
Like heroin, I haven't used bad language yet, but heroin is a shit drug.
Yeah.
Right? It's so cheap, you know. Like the next crime gets you your next 50 bag or whatever it is. I don't know what that is even, but you know, so like all the crimes, you know, whatever it is, fund your next one. So whether it's robbing from your grandmother or grabbing a handbag or robbing from a shop, that gets you your next one. And then it's so addictive, right? So these like.
But what I'm saying there now is not rational argument for, I'm just telling you my experience. It was like, I stay away from the methadone, and like, I always had that out option, that, right, if things get really bad, I lock myself into the bedroom for 5 days and I'll be fine. That was my,
did you have the wherewithal to lock yourself in? Or was
I
it
done
like,
it
was it
loads.
like train spotting when you had somebody passing you the soup and lock the door?
I lock myself into my dad's gaff or something, and I done a cold turkey a lot of times, but as soon as the physical symptoms leave you, you want the drug again. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And
that's the comfort of it. That's
the repetition in the mind. Like,
but you see, when I did eventually get well, it was actually through methadone. Because when I rang Merchants Key Ireland and I told them I was strung out and I was overdosing regularly at the time, and I had a very near death experience, and I was homeless and everything, and I rang Merchants Key Ireland and I said, look, I didn't know what to do, where to go, and I was desperate, and they said, we can get you into a detox in the treatment centre, but you need to be on methadone to do it. And I went through Dr. Horan, actually, from Dr. Aidan Horan from Arbour House.
It's a great service.
Yeah.
Aidan, Declan.
And I went on the methadone over there, come off the heroin, stabilised my life, and got into treatment that way. So when it's used right, methadone is a great drug.
Yeah.
You know, it's just
like it certainly helps to stabilise the lifestyle of
take the madness out of you, like, because you don't have to do the erratic thefts and stuff.
Is there anything you'd change about the way the methadone programs being ran in the prison? Would you change it? Like, I know some prisoners go in, they're on 50 mils, they stay on the 50 mils for the whole sentence, whatever. Should it be compulsory for? No, I'm just saying this. If there's any fucking fellas,
compulsory for detox during the committal.
It come down off. Yeah,
I'd say no, right? And the reason I'd say no is
I'm like, completely naive to it. That's all.
Risk of overdose when you get out.
So that kind of shoulder period when you come out, kind of like we talked about earlier, like that, like coming back to what you said earlier, right? And you both said it about, you know, kind of having that routine, the camaraderie, the lads, your triats and the cot, the exercise and the meditation, and then coming out and kind of having to take responsibility for yourselves again, and that causing anxiety. Well, that makes total sense, right? But people's perception of coming out of prison isn't that. People's, like my perception of being of incarcerated would be that you live for the day you get out, you know, and that you know, and the day you get out is the happiest day of your life, you know. But clearly that's not the case for everybody.
Well,
right?
no, when you're inside, or you're longing for it, and you're saying, when I get out this, but when the reality hits you, when you get outside the gate, and it's like, where you going to go, what are you going to do? You've no fucking job, you've no money, you're after wrecking your family, you burned all your bridges, what have you? Only the drugs.
And if you haven't got the crutches, the drug in my case, I was sober and clean when I came out.
Yeah.
That's when things really started to change.
That's why, like, compulsory detox probably isn't a good idea, because you know that see, lads might, I don't know how way you measure it, right, whether it's 100 euros a day or 5 bags a day, whatever they're using before they go in. Like, if they've been in for 9 months, they become opiate naive again, and that degree of usage could be at risk to them then, because they don't have the tolerance.
That makes sense.
So that's why
That does
you know,
make sense, yeah.
that probably, but again, if lads want to detox, they can. Just, like, there now is a weekly addiction clinic. Now it's not the same through COVID and less face to face, but there is a weekly addiction clinic in Cork Prison. Like the services have, and I suppose a couple of things happened. There was a prison inspection, I think by Amnesty, probably around the time that you're talking of, and they got severely criticised for the addiction services.
Was that report released recently?
Well, the one I'm thinking about now is probably over 10 years old, but there was a new one, and in fairness, they have really invested heavily infrastructure-wise on the IT, on the services, the support services, the GP side of it, even, you know, the amount of nurses in the prison, like, you know, the healthcare infrastructure within the prisons has really, really improved, and the standard of care has risen with that.
Yeah,
definitely.
that's good to hear. Look, I've one more thing I want to ask you before we finish up, because we've been going for over an hour. Because the nature of the work of a GP, you come across a lot of very sick people, obviously, very sad cases. I presume you build good relationships with people, and then if things aren't working out for those people, you feel sad for them and you have connections. And is there any supervision for a GP, or is that down to the individual doctor? Like, would you do any therapy every couple of months? Or?
No, so I think what you're drawing a parallel with is that the psychologists have a supervision, and like, so I was surprised. I saw there's a very senior psychologist who I send a lot of patients to, and I was talking to him one day, and in the course of conversation, he just said to me, when I go to my supervisor, I thought, who is supervising you? Like, you're like, this guy is like, you know, so we don't have that kind of debrief, but we do have, I suppose, a structured continuing professional development program. And now it's self-structured, but there's guidance on what you're supposed to do, and within that, it's compulsory for every doctor, not just general practitioners, to keep up to date for a certain amount of hours. It's 50 hours every year, so that's 1 hour a week. It's not a whole lot. Like with COVID, we're all been a lot more than that, because we're learning. But yeah. So we do have structured professional development programs, but we don't have that debriefing thing. And I think it's a good point. Like, you know, that not just in general practice, but like there is a higher level of addiction among doctors as a profession than there are in other professions. And so the I suppose the self-awareness to know when you're in trouble, and we have access to these drugs, right? So doctors have
writing your own script.
Well,
would it be alcohol?
It has happened.
Would it be alcohol, or would it be prescribed meds?
Both. But there's, like, I'll be aware of several colleagues who would have had difficulties with prescribed meds.
Would that be down to the sorry, James, the workload of the job, do you think, or the stresses of life in general?
I think everybody's different. Like, so for some colleagues, it might be they genuinely get prescribed a medication for, you know, break their ankle, you know, and they need some morphine, and, you know, all of a sudden they have morphine, you know, or it could be that, you know, they have a bereavement and they say, you know what, I'll take a steatin tablet for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden it's 2 years. So I'd say it's not one size fits all, but there certainly is, there are those challenges there. And like, again, like of course we're in the helping profession, and our teams are trained to help people. But it's important that people remember that our teams are human too, especially our front of house teams. Like, they're men and women that come to work to do a job, and not to get shouted at because Nick
On
Flynn
about the secretaries and
left
stuff.
two
Is it?
diazepam short in the prescription or whatever it is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So like if there was a call to arms at the end of the podcast, it would be that like your general practice team is there to help. We want to help. That's our job. That's why we're in the community. But certainly our front of house team, they're really all working very hard, really heroic, and they could do with appreciation which you get from most people, and anybody who's inclined to shout at them, please stop.
Yeah, exactly. And look, and that's a great point to finish on, you know. So look, thanks a million for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.
Very frank and candid, I'd say. And I think it'll provide a lot of transparency for people that might not know a whole lot about this. And I think with your honesty and our honesty, it might give people into an insight as to the relationship between a GP and somebody in addiction and mental health, somebody in prison. So I enjoyed it, and I hope you did too.
Yeah, very much. Thanks, guys. And best of luck with it. Great.
Yeah,
and a great initiative on social entrepreneurship, so congratulations.
Exactly.
And you know what, just before we do finish, I just want to thank yourself and George for all the work you've done, my own family down through the years, and the work you've done with our community, you know, because there's no one saying that, really, because you have done an awful lot of good.
I think
and
George
helped an awful
in
lot of
particular has
people.
been a hero for that.
Well,
part
the
of that.
surgery, well, he brought it up there, like he brought the actual service up there initially, and fair play to him, you know, because I grew up with George. George was somebody in my...
I'll tell George, fast forward to the last 2 minutes.
I know.
But anyway, listen, just
Thanks,
thank
lads.
you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks to all the staff in Nick and George Surgery for the care they provide to the people in the community in City
And a
Northwest.
big shout out to George.
And my CorkGP.ie.
And my Cork GP.
/ the 2 Norries. You can donate there.
By the way, he offered myself and James free GP care for the year as well.
If you get a COVID test every time.
Well, I see you later. I'll see you next week. Thanks,
Thank you.
Rowan. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.